Welcome back to RFL. Last night we heard from a man who's devoted his life to reforming the police and justice system in New York. He told us that quotas do in fact exist within the NYPD and that they're creating a racial profiling problem for New York cops.
There's an aggressively enforced quota system within the NYPD that puts a very strong pressure on cops to come up with the numbers. And we know of cases, and there are more and more cops coming forward and former cops coming forward saying the pressure is so great on at least some cops that they'll arrest people and they'll give out tickets to people, and some of the people, even though they've done nothing wrong.
Now that is a sentiment we've heard echoed by a New York City police officer who's been suspended for speaking out about those problems within the NYPD.
We're being forced to arrest innocent people. We're being forced, everything was about numbers. They wanted X amount of summonses, they wanted X amount of arrests, they wanted stop and frisk, they wanted everything, and they were obsessed with the number.
It is, of course, a problem without an answer, at least at the moment, but one lawmaker is searching for a solution. State Senator Gianaris, a Queens Democrat, has proposed a bill that would make police department quotas illegal. He joins us now to explain his bill. Senator Gianaris, thank you so much for joining us. Tell me about your bill that would stop those quotas, and how would that impact stop and frisk?
Well, it would make it illegal for a certain number of stop and frisk to be required of officers, and there's a lot of speculation, as you just heard, about whether these quotas exist. The reality is we know they exist, and police officers are being held to account based on not only for stop and frisk, but the number of summonses they issue, the number of tickets they give, and so on. And right now the law says that quotas are not allowed to be used to punish an officer who doesn't meet them, but there's nothing saying that the use of those quotas as a metric is illegal, and that's what I'm proposing.
Does your bill stop the sort of unofficial quota system? I mean, how do you know that it would be able to? There's one thing between a codified quota and another that, you know, in a quiet moment the sergeant says to the cops walking the beat, hey, we still need these stops. It's
a good question. There's no codified quotas in place right now. All of this is occurring behind closed doors, and we rely on officers who are being penalized for not meeting the quotas, or just other ways that these things are coming out, because we do hear stories like the one your guest from yesterday had indicated, that these things are happening. But it would be like any other investigation, something that's illegal. Very much like any other crime, no one's out there telling you they're doing it. We have to go find it and prevent it from happening.
Isn't this sort of nibbling at the edges of the whole issue, though? Why not just end stop and frisk altogether?
Well, that's a bigger debate that's taking place right now. This is one aspect of it that I think contributes strongly to the problem. The number of stop and frisks has skyrocketed. It does not bear relation, I don't believe, to the actual crimes that are being committed or prevented. And so what you have is an arbitrary number that's being set for these officers, that they are then incentivized to go out there and meet a certain number of stop and frisks, and they end up stopping and frisking a number of people that were not at risk of committing a crime at all. And what we've seen is disproportionately that's in certain communities of color particularly, and that ends up having a discriminatory effect, if not a discriminatory intent.
Clearly you would support an end to quotas. You've proposed a bill that would do just that. There's also a bill that would extend the decriminalization for public view of low levels of marijuana. I'm curious whether you support that bill, and also if you would support a bill that just eliminated the policy of stop and frisk altogether.
There's three questions in there, right?
I know. I'm trying to get my money's worth.
I do support the governor's proposal on the low-level marijuana possession issue. Important to note that that does not in any way decriminalize the actual smoking of marijuana, but just if someone is found, because what we've seen is that is a contributing factor in the number of these stop and frisks that are taking place. But I do think there's a place for stop and frisk. But it should not be used arbitrarily and in the massive amounts of numbers that we've seen. If someone is suspected of committing a criminal act or about to commit a criminal act, of course the police should have the ability to stop and frisk that person. But what we've seen is it's being used far too often, and in cases where there is no criminal activity taking place. And I think even Mayor Bloomberg just today said that he realizes that the policy needs to be amended and reformed so that we don't see the kind of abuses that people have been talking about.
What do you say to members of minority communities of New York City who are going to say, you know, whether there are quotas or no quotas, we're still going to be unfairly targeted by this policy, and it's still going to be pulling over particularly young members of our communities who have done nothing wrong and wind up having it be proven that they've done nothing wrong?
Well, if people have done nothing wrong and there's no reason to believe they were about to do something wrong, then they should not be stopped.
But they are clearly being stopped.
Yeah,
right?
they are currently, and I think as relates to my answer to your previous question, I would say stops and frisks should be used only in circumstances where there's a reason to believe that something is about to happen that shouldn't happen, or there's a reason to believe something has already happened and there's a suspect who's being stopped. But to do it arbitrarily in certain communities is something that should be prevented.
One of the supporters of stop and frisk who was with us this week likened the policy to that of airport security. You get past security, you got to go through the pat downs, you got to go through the checks, and so why shouldn't, she argued, why shouldn't that happen on the streets? Do we want our city looking like the clear zone past security at an airport?
Yeah, you just answered your own question. Of course we don't. It's one thing to get on a plane, which has already been the subject of terrorist attacks and is a particularly vulnerable place for travelers, and people want to feel safe while they're traveling. I think everybody understands that. But in our own home communities, in our own neighborhoods, I don't think people who set foot outside their home want to be subject to that kind of abusive behavior.
Last question. There's a protest, a silent protest Sunday starting in Harlem. It's getting a lot of coverage, a lot of attention. What would be your message to those people who feel so moved by this issue that they're going to take to the streets on Sunday?
I would say that they're doing the right thing. They're raising awareness. They're doing it peacefully and in the greatest tradition of some of the civil rights movements that have existed in this country. And I wish them well and hope we are able to make some progress shortly. All
right, State Senator Michael Gianaris, Democrat from Queens, thank you so much. Really appreciate you giving us a few minutes.